I've wanted to do this, Callista breathed, her words a ghost of warmth against Seraphina's lips, since I first saw you in the doorway. A drowned rat, staring at a goddess. And then there was no more space. No more words. Callista's mouth found hers, and it was not a question but an answer. It was acclaiming, fierce and sure, a kiss that tasted of storm winds and freedom and a hunger that echoed the one clawing at Seraphina's own soul. It was nothing like the chaste, calculated kisses she had known before. This was a conflagration. Seraphina's hands, of their own volition, flew to Callista's hair, tangling in the wild, damp curls, pulling her closer, surrendering to the dizzying, terrifying rightness of it. Before we dive into this lesbian story, your subscription and support are always appreciated. The Gilded Cage and the Wildflower. The antique grandfather clock in the hall chimed 11 times, each resonant bong a hammer strike on the anvil of Seraphina's solitude. She sat, a still-life portrait in a gilded frame, on a velvet chaise lounge in the library. Her silk dressing gown, the color of crushed violets, pooled around her. One hand held a book of poetry, though her eyes hadn't moved from the same page in over an hour. The words were just black marks on cream paper, failing to penetrate the dense fog of her loneliness. Wind howled outside, rattling the leaded glass windows of the vast, old manor house, Ravenhurst. It was a sound of wild freedom, a stark contrast to the stifling silence within. Her father, Lord Alistair Croft, was away in London on business, as he so often was, leaving her to preside over a house of echoes and memories. At 28, Seraphina felt her life was a beautifully decorated, utterly empty room. A sudden, frantic pounding on the heavy oak front door shattered the quiet. Not the polite tap of a neighbor, but a desperate, jarring rhythm. Seraphina started, the book slipping from her lap. Mrs. Abbott, the elderly housekeeper, was surely abed by now. Wrapping her gown tighter, Seraphina moved through the cavernous halls, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. She pulled open the door, and the storm rushed in, carrying with it its most compelling offering. A woman stood on the doorstep, drenched and shaking. Rain plastered dark, unruly curls to her forehead and streamed down a face that was all sharp, defiant angles and startling green eyes. She was clutching the strap of a worn leather satchel as if it were a lifeline. Her clothes, a practical wool coat and sturdy trousers, were soaked through, clinging to a form that was lean and strong. I'm sorry to disturb you," the woman said, her voice husky from the cold, or perhaps that was its natural state. "My motorcar. It's ditched in the mud about a mile down the lane. I couldn't see a thing. I saw your lights." Seraphina was momentarily speechless. This was no lost traveler from the village. This woman was a force of nature, as wild and untamed as the storm itself. She was the most alive thing Seraphina had seen in years. "Please, come in. You'll catch your death," Seraphina said, finding her voice a softer, more cultured instrument. She stepped aside. The woman crossed the threshold, leaving a puddle on the pristine floor. She looked around the grand entrance hall with its soaring ceiling and sweeping staircase, not with awe, but with a keen, assessing gaze. "This is Ravenhurst, isn't it? I was looking for it, actually. I'm the new botanist." Understanding dawned on Seraphina. Her father had written briefly about hiring someone to catalogue the estate's extensive and overgrown gardens, a project to add another feather to his cap of accomplishments. He'd mentioned a name. "You are Ms. Wren." "Callista," the woman said, offering a damp, chilled hand. "Callista Wren." Seraphina took it, the contrast between her own soft, manicured fingers and Callista's work roughened, cold ones sending a jolt through her. "I am Seraphina Croft. My father is away. Let's get you warm." She led Callista to the library, where a fire still crackled in the great stone hearth. The light played over Callista's features as she knelt before it, holding her hands out to the flames. Seraphina watched her, mesmerized. She moved with an unstudied grace, an economy of motion that spoke of a life spent doing, not merely being. "I'll have Mrs. Abbott prepare a room," Seraphina said. "You'll stay here tonight, of course. We can see to your motorcar in the morning." Callista looked up, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "I couldn't impose." "It's no imposition. It's necessity. The nearest inn is 10 miles away, And I suspect you'd prefer not to walk back into that. Seraphina gestured towards the window, where rain lashed against the glass. A faint, wry smile touched Callista's lips. No, I suppose I wouldn't. Thank you. Your hospitality is unexpected. Why unexpected? Seraphina asked, curious. Callista's gaze swept the room again, taking in the shelves of leather-bound books, the expensive artworks, the palpable wealth. Places like this, people like, well, they're not always welcoming to muddy interlopers. People like me. Seraphina prompted, a slight challenge in her tone. Callista met her eyes directly, unflinching. Yes. In that single word, Seraphina felt the vast gulf between their lives. She was the caged bird. Callista was the one who flew on the storm winds. An inexplicable ache bloomed in her chest. Over the next week, Ravenhurst, for the first time in Seraphina's memory, felt inhabited. Callista was a quiet but pervasive presence. She rose at dawn and spent her days in the gardens and the greenhouses, her hands buried in the earth, identifying, sketching, and cataloguing with a fierce concentration. Seraphina found herself inventing reasons to be near her. She would take a book and read in the conservatory where Callista was potting seedlings. She would bring her a glass of lemonade on a surprisingly warm afternoon. Their conversations were initially polite, circling around the weather, the gardens, the history of the house. But slowly, they began to deepen. Do you ever leave this place? Callista asked one afternoon. She was repotting a fragile orchid, her touch incredibly gentle despite her strong hands. Seraphina looked up from her novel. For parties in London. Charity events. It's all very scheduled. It sounds like a different kind of prison, Callista said softly, and then looked immediately horrified. I'm sorry. That was unforgivably rude. But Seraphina just smiled, a sad, genuine smile. No, it's unforgivably accurate. My life is a series of beautifully decorated rooms. I'm the chief ornament. Callista put down her trowel. What would you do? If you could do anything. The question was so simple, yet it stunned Seraphina. No one had ever asked her that. Her future had always been a predetermined path, a suitable marriage, a suitable life, continuing the line of suitable ornamentation. I don't know, she whispered, and the admission was terrifying. I think you do, Callista said, her gaze intense. I see the way you look at the moors. It's not with fear. It's with longing. One evening, Seraphina found Callista in the library, not by the fire, but standing before a large, covered canvas that leaned against a far wall. What's this? Callista asked. The shape is familiar. Seraphina felt a flush of embarrassment. It's nothing. An old failed project. Callista, with a boldness that no one in the house would ever dare exhibit, reached out and pulled the dust cover away. It was a painting. A self-portrait. A much younger Seraphina stared out from the canvas, her eyes blazing with a passion and defiance the current Seraphina barely remembered possessing. The brushwork was impulsive, a little wild, full of raw, untrained talent. Seraphina, Callista breathed, turning to her. This is incredible. It's you. The real you. Why is it hidden away? My father, he said it was unseemly. Too emotional. A lady's pastime should be quieter. The old criticism echoed in her head, dimming the vibrant girl in the painting. Callista stepped closer to the canvas, then closer to Seraphina. The air between them grew thick and charged. He was wrong. This is the most beautiful thing I've seen in this house. It's alive. She turned her head, and her eyes were no longer on the painting, but on Seraphina's face. They were standing so close Seraphina could smell the scent on her. Clean sweat, damp earth, and something sweet, like wild thyme. Without thinking, driven by a need she could no longer suppress, Seraphina reached out and touched a curl that had escaped from Callista's messy bun. It was as soft as she'd imagined. Callista went perfectly still, her eyes wide, her lips slightly parted. She didn't pull away. She leaned into the touch. The world narrowed to the space between their bodies. The crackle of the fire, the sigh of the wind, it was all a symphony for this single, suspended moment. And then Callista I've wanted to do that since I first saw you in the doorway, Callista whispered, her voice raw. A drowned rat, staring at a goddess. Seraphina laughed, a breathy, joyous sound she didn't recognize as her own. And I've wanted you to. The confession hung in the air, terrifying and exhilarating. Your father, Callista began, a note of caution returning. Is not here, Seraphina finished, her voice gaining a new strength. She took Callista's hand. And this is my house, too. She led her from the library, up the grand staircase, down the long corridor to her bedroom. It was a room fit for the ornament, all pale silks and delicate furniture. But when Seraphina closed the door and turned to Callista, she felt like a queen claiming her throne. The boldness of the hallway vanished, replaced by a trembling vulnerability. They stood facing each other, the high-born lady and the botanist, the gilded cage and the wildflower. Are you sure? Callista asked, her voice gentle now, giving her every chance to retreat. In answer, Seraphina began to untie the sash of her violet gown. It slid from her shoulders, a whisper of silk against skin, and pooled at her feet. She stood before Callista, bathed in the soft moonlight filtering through the window, utterly exposed and unafraid. Callista's breath hitched. My God, Seraphina, you're so beautiful. The words were not a platitude, they were a prayer. She crossed the room and her hands, those capable, earth-stained hands, came up to cradle Seraphina's face. This kiss was different. Slower. Deeper. A exploration. A devotion. Seraphina's hands worked at the buttons of Callista's wet shirt, her fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar fastenings. Impatient, Callista shrugged it off herself, followed by her simple cotton chemise. Her skin was sun-kissed and scattered with a constellation of faint freckles across her shoulders. Her body was a map of a life lived outdoors, lean muscle, a small scar on her ribs, strength and softness in equal measure. They fell onto the bed, a tangle of limbs and eager mouths. Callista's touch was everywhere, learning her, worshipping her. She kissed the hollow of Seraphina's throat, the slope of her breast, the sensitive skin of her stomach. Seraphina, who had always been taught that her body was a decorative object to be presented, discovered it was, in fact, an instrument of incredible sensation. When Callista's mouth finally found the core of her, hot and wet and insistent, Seraphina cried out, her back arching off the bed. It was an unlocking. Years of restraint and loneliness shattered under the relentless, skillful pressure of Callista's tongue. She wasn't an ornament. She was a woman, a flame, coming apart in the hands of another woman who saw her, truly saw her, for the first time. Wave after wave of pleasure crashed over her, so intense it was almost unbearable. She sobbed Callista's name, her fingers gripping the dark, wild curls between her thighs. When she finally stilled, boneless and spent, Callista moved up her body, holding her, pressing soft kisses to her eyelids, her cheeks, her lips. You are so much more than this place, Callista murmured against her skin. Show me, Seraphina begged, her voice ragged. Show me everything. And Callista did. She guided Seraphina's hands to her own body, teaching her the textures, the rhythms of pleasure. Seraphina learned the taste of her skin, salt and wild thyme. She learned the sound Callista made, a low, guttural moan, when Seraphina's fingers slipped inside her. She learned the way her own body could bring another to the same shattering peak, and the profound intimacy of holding her as she fell. They loved each other through the night, the storm outside finally abating, leaving a world washed clean. In the quiet hours before dawn, they lay entwined, limbs overlapping, breath synchronizing. Seraphina traced the line of Callista's jaw. I feel like I've been asleep my entire life, she whispered. And you kissed me awake. Callista turned her head and pressed a kiss to Seraphina's palm. Then stay awake with me. The affair bloomed in the hidden corners of Ravenhurst with the fierce, rapid growth of a wild rose. The house, once a monument to her solitude, became a labyrinth of secret delights. Their world was the sun-dappled conservatory, the dusty attic, the hidden groves in the garden where no prying eyes from the house could see. Seraphina began to paint again. Callista would pose for her, not in a studio, but lying naked on a blanket in a meadow, the sun warming her skin, a slight, knowing smile on her lips. Seraphina's brushstrokes became freer, more confident, filled with a passion and color that had been absent for a decade. She wasn't painting an ornament. She was painting her muse, her lover, her freedom. They talked for hours. Seraphina learned of Callista's life, her travels through Europe studying rare flora, her small cottage filled with pressed flowers and books, her independence won through sheer force of will and intellect. Callista learned of Seraphina's dreams, so long suppressed, to travel, to have a studio of her own, to live a life that was authentically hers. "Come away with me," Callista said one afternoon as they lay by the lake, their fingers laced together. "When my work here is done, come to my cottage. We can fill it with your paintings. We can wake up every morning like this." The idea was so dazzling, so terrifying, it took Seraphina's breath away. To leave Ravenhurst. To defy her father. To choose a life of love and uncertainty over one of lonely comfort. "Yes," she said, the word a vow. "Yes." But gilded cages, she would learn, have very strong locks. A letter arrived. Lord Croft was returning a week early. The carefully constructed paradise trembled. The atmosphere in the house shifted instantly. The staff, who had perhaps turned a blind eye to the unusual closeness between the lady of the house and the botanist, now became formal and distant. Seraphina felt the walls closing in again. The night before her father's return, they met in the conservatory one last time. The air was heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and impending loss. "We'll be careful," Callista said, holding her tightly. "We can be discreet until you're ready to leave." Seraphina wanted to believe her, but a cold dread had settled in her stomach. She knew her father. Lord Alistair Croft arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet, oppressive authority that filled the house. He was a tall, severe man with eyes the color of flint and a presence that demanded obedience. He summoned Callista to his study on his first evening back. Seraphina waited in the library, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. When Callista emerged, her face was pale, her mouth set in a hard, thin line. She didn't speak, just walked stiffly to the garden, Seraphina following helplessly. "What did he say?" Seraphina demanded when they were a safe distance from the house. Callista turned to her, her green eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and pain. "He offered me a bonus. A substantial one. To finish my work ahead of schedule and leave immediately. He said my influence was disruptive." Seraphina's blood ran cold. "He knows." "He suspects," Callista corrected bitterly. "He doesn't need proof. He just needs to remove the variable he can't control." She grabbed Seraphina's hands. "It doesn't matter. My work is almost done. We can leave in a fortnight, just as we planned." But the plan was ash. The following day, Seraphina was summoned to the study. Her father did not sit behind his desk. He stood before the fire, a glass of brandy in his hand. He didn't look at her. "The botanist," he began, his voice cold and even. "She will be gone by the end of the week." "Father, Do not interrupt me, Seraphina." He finally turned his gaze on her, and it was like being struck. "I have spent a lifetime building a legacy of respectability for this family. I will not see it tarnished by the unnatural dalliances of my daughter with a hired hand." The words, so crude and cruel, hung in the air. Seraphina felt sick. "It is not a dalliance," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I love her." Lord Croft's lip curled in a sneer. "Love. You are Croft. Your love is a currency to be spent on an advantageous marriage, not wasted on a passing fantasy. This ends now. And if I refuse?" The defiance cost her everything. He smiled, a thin, horrible smile. "Then I will ruin her. I have friends at the Royal Botanical Society. Her name will be mud. She will never work again. Her life, her independence, everything she has built, will be gone. And you will have caused it." It was a checkmate. He wasn't threatening to lock Seraphina away. He was threatening to destroy the very woman she loved. He knew her weakness was not herself, but Callista's well-being. The fight drained out of her. She saw the future he offered, a life without Callista, but a life where Callista was safe, successful, and free. To fight him was to chain Callista to a different kind of prison, one of poverty and scorn. Tears streamed down her face, silent and hopeless. "You will be civil until she leaves," her father said, turning back to the fire, dismissing her. "And then you will forget this ever happened. The Viscount Everley will be visiting next month. You will be agreeable." That night, Seraphina went to Callista's room in the servants' wing. She didn't have to explain. The devastation on her face told the whole story. "He can't do this," Callista said, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "We'll leave tonight. Now." Seraphina shook her head, weeping. "He will destroy you, Callista. Your work, your reputation. I cannot let you pay that price for me." "I don't care about my reputation," Callista cried, her own tears falling. "I care about you. But I care about you." Seraphina sobbed. "Don't you see? Your freedom is the thing I love most about you. I will not be the one who takes it away." They held each other through the night, a desperate, heartbroken vigil. Their lovemaking was different this time, a slow, aching, final communion. Every touch was a memory being seared into their skin, every kiss a goodbye. They worshipped each other's bodies not with the joy of discovery, but with the profound grief of impending loss. When the pale light of dawn crept into the room, they knew it was over. Callista left that afternoon. Her motorcar, pulled from the ditch, was packed. She didn't look back as she drove down the long gravel drive. Seraphina watched from her bedroom window, her hand pressed against the cold glass, until the car was a speck and then nothing at all. The silence that descended on Ravenhurst was deeper and more profound than any that had come before. Seraphina moved through the days like a ghost. She stopped painting. The covered canvas was returned to its dark corner. The Viscount Everley visited. He was polite, handsome, and dull. She was, as instructed, agreeable. An engagement was announced. The ornament was being prepared for its new display case. Weeks bled into months. The world turned grey. Seraphina felt the old numbness returning, but it was worse now because she knew what lay beyond it. She had tasted sunlight and now lived in perpetual shadow. One afternoon, a package arrived for her. Mrs. Abbott brought it to the library with a curious expression. It was wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with string. There was no return address, but the postmark was from a coastal village hundreds of miles away. With trembling hands, Seraphina opened it. Inside was a book. A beautiful, leather-bound folio. On the front cover, tooled in gold, was the title, Flora of Ravenhurst. She opened it. Inside were Callista's exquisite, detailed drawings of every plant she had catalogued. But it was more than a scientific record. Interleaved between the pages of botanical drawings were others. Drawings of her. Seraphina reading in the conservatory, sunlight on her hair. Seraphina laughing, her head thrown back. Seraphina sleeping, her face peaceful and soft. And on the final page, a drawing based on her own hidden self-portrait, but in Callista's style. The younger Seraphina's eyes still blazed, but beside her, a spectre-like impression of the woman she was now, and the two figures were connected by a delicate, swirling vine of wild roses. At the bottom, in Callista's precise script, were the words, "The wildflower will always find a way to grow. I am waiting. Always." A single, pressed flower fell into her lap. A common wild time. It was not a plea to come back. It was a statement of fact. A declaration of unwavering love and faith. It was a map, left for her to follow if she ever found the courage. Seraphina clutched the book to her chest, sobs racking her body. But these were not tears of despair. They were tears of awakening. He had not ruined them. He had only interrupted them. She looked around the library, at the gilded ceilings and the silent books. She looked at her engagement ring, a cold, perfect diamond. She thought of a life of being agreeable, of being the ornament, of withering away in a beautiful, empty room. And she thought of a cottage by the sea, filled with paintings and pressed flowers, and a woman with earth-stained hands and eyes the color of a wild forest. The choice had never been between safety and love. It was between a slow death and a life fully lived. That night, Seraphina Croft packed a single bag. She took the folio, her own self-portrait, and the jewelry her mother had left her, which was hers alone. She wrote a short, unequivocal letter to the Viscount Everley, breaking the engagement. She wrote no letter to her father. He would understand her actions well enough. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, she walked out of Ravenhurst for the last time. She did not take the car. She walked down the long drive, just as Callista had that first night, but this time toward something. She reached the main road and waited. A lorry driver heading for the coast offered her a lift. As the countryside rolled by, Seraphina opened the folio to the last page. She touched the drawing of her own face, then the pressed flower. She smiled, a real, true, unguarded smile for the first time in months. She was no longer the woman in the gilded cage. She was the wildflower, finally breaking through the stone, reaching for the sun. And she was going home. The conclusion. The cottage was smaller than she'd imagined, a whitewashed stone structure nestled into a cliffside like a seabird's nest, its windows facing a vast, churning expanse of grey-blue sea. The air was different here. It tasted of salt and possibility, carrying the cries of gulls on the wind instead of the oppressive silence of Ravenhurst. Seraphina stood at the wooden gate, her single bag at her feet, her heart hammering a rhythm that was equal parts terror and exhilaration. She had been travelling for 2 days, a journey that felt both like a lifetime and the blink of an eye. The world outside Ravenhurst had been a blur of unfamiliar landscapes and kind, ordinary people who knew nothing of the Croft name or its expectations. With every mile, the weight on her shoulders had lightened, until she felt she might simply float away. Now, she was here. The final step. Pushing open the gate, she walked up the short, pebbled path. The garden was a wild, glorious mess, not the curated order of Ravenhurst, but a joyful, chaotic burst of colour. Lupins and poppies jostled for space with hardy, wind-bent shrubs, and herbs she recognised from Callista's satchel spilled over onto the path. It was a garden that was lived in, loved. She raised a hand to knock on the blue-painted door, but paused. Taped to the wood was a small, simple sketch of a wild thyme plant. Beneath it, an arrow pointed around the side of the cottage. Her breath caught. Following the direction, she walked around to the back, where the land fell away to reveal the sheer drop to the sea below. And there she was. Callista was on her knees, her back to Seraphina, her hands buried in the dark earth as she tenderly settled a new plant into a bed. She wore worn trousers and a simple linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The wind tugged at her dark, unruly curls, and the late afternoon sun gilded her profile. She was humming, a low, absent-minded tune that was carried away on the sea breeze. Seraphina simply watched her for a long moment, drinking in the sight. This was real. She was here. This was not a dream or a desperate fantasy spun in a lonely library. This was a woman, whole and free, in her element. "You'll need to water that one deeply," Seraphina said, her voice softer than the wind, yet it seemed to ring out in the quiet space. Callista froze. Her hands stilled in the soil. She didn't turn around for a long second, as if afraid the voice was a trick of the wind. Slowly, very slowly, she rose to her feet and turned. There was no shock on her face. No cry of surprise. There was only a slow, dawning wonder, as if the sun were rising behind Seraphina's eyes. Her gaze, those clear green eyes that had haunted Seraphina's every waking moment, swept over her, taking in the travel-worn clothes, the single bag, the new, unguarded light in Seraphina's face. A smile began to spread across Callista's features, a real, deep, sun-warmed smile that reached her eyes and lit them from within. It was the smile Seraphina had only ever seen glimpses of at Ravenhurst, now unleashed in its full, breathtaking glory. "I know," Callista said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's a thirsty one. But it's resilient. It just needs the right place to put down roots." They stood there, a few feet apart, the space between them humming with everything that had been lost and everything that was now found. The unspoken questions, the weeks of heartache, the fear, it all melted away in the sheer, undeniable truth of this moment. "I'm here," Seraphina said, the words a vow, a confession, a final release from the past. "I'm staying." Callista closed the distance between them in 2 strides. Her hands, caked with rich, dark earth, came up to cradle Seraphina's face, not as a delicate ornament, but as the most cherished, solid thing she had ever held. She didn't kiss her. She just rested her forehead against Seraphina's, her eyes closed, breathing her in. "I knew you'd find your way," Callista whispered, her thumb stroking gentle arcs on Seraphina's cheeks. "I never stopped waiting." "You left me a map," Seraphina replied, her own hands coming up to cover Callista's, pressing them closer, feeling the grit of the soil, the strength in her fingers. The most real things she had ever felt. Finally, Callista leaned in and kissed her. It was not like the desperate, hungry kisses of their hidden nights at Ravenhurst, born of stolen time and impending loss. This kiss was slow, deep, and sweet, a homecoming. It tasted of sea salt and hope and a future wide open before them. It was a promise of 1,000 more kisses, in the sunlight, with no one to hide from. When they parted, Callista laced her earthy fingers with Seraphina's clean ones. "Come inside," she said. "I'll show you your studio. The light is perfect for painting in the morning." Seraphina let herself be led into the small, warm cottage. It was exactly as she had dreamed it would be from Callista's descriptions. Shelves overflowing with books and stacks of pressed flowers, a large stone fireplace, sketches pinned to the walls, and everywhere, the evidence of a life passionately lived. And in the corner, by a large window facing the sea, was an empty space, an easel waiting beside a table ready for paints. It wasn't a gilded cage. It was a sanctuary. That night, they lay together in a narrow bed under a sloping ceiling, the sound of the waves a constant, soothing rhythm beneath the wind. There were no hurried, frantic touches, no fear of discovery. There was only the slow, reverent exploration of a landscape they now had a lifetime to learn. Seraphina traced the familiar constellation of freckles on Callista's shoulders, kissed the small scar on her rib, loved her with a deep, steady certainty that left them both breathless and trembling, not with desperation, but with joy. After, wrapped in each other and the rough, woolen blankets, Seraphina looked around the moonlit room. Her eyes fell on the folio of Ravenhurst's Flora, now sitting on a bedside table beside her own uncovered self-portrait. The two women in the drawing, the girl she was and the woman she became, no longer seemed like separate entities. Under this roof, by this sea, in this bed, they were finally, completely, one. "Are you happy?" Callista murmured into her hair, her arm a warm, secure weight across Seraphina's waist. Seraphina turned in her arms to face her. In the darkness, she could see the faint gleam of Callista's eyes. She thought of the vast, silent rooms of Ravenhurst, the cold touch of silk, the expectations that were like chains. She thought of her father's flinty eyes and the Viscount's polite, disinterested smile. Then she looked at the woman beside her, her fierce, earth-stained, brilliant love, who had seen the fire in her soul and had dared to fan the flames. "I am awake," Seraphina whispered, kissing her softly. "And I am free. That is more than happiness. That is everything." Outside, the wild thyme growing by the cottage door released its scent into the night air, a sweet, enduring promise. It had found a way to grow through the stone. And so, at last, had she.